do yourself a favor. Before you glue the magnets to any screw, go ahead and wash the screw in some sort of a solvent to get the oil off of it. The oil inhibits the glue's performance and it may break off later if you don't do that. Also, a good tip is to mar the surface of the magnet with some sandpaper, and just a little bit where the glue is going to hold on to it. That will make sure that that glue bond is nice and strong. Alright, what I've done here is drilled some holes in a box, and I've got some of these small hex screws mounted in here, and I've mixed up some JB Quick down here to glue on the ball magnets. So really this isn't too difficult of a process. You just gotta put some glue on, not too much, otherwise it'll kind of smear all over the place once you put the magnet on. In fact, I got too much of it right there. But when you put the ball on, especially these small screws, you'll want to make sure that the marking goes straight up. Alright, I actually got too much glue on that, so I'm just going to get a rag and wipe off the excess. That's perfect. So we'll set that aside and let the glue dry. You'll want to do that for each of them. Alright, I've mixed up another batch of epoxy. These screws will go inside the effector. When I put the magnet on, I want the pole of the magnet to be really at sort of like a 45-degree angle off from straight ahead. So I'm going to glue this with the screw really as far off from the pole as I can get it. And there we go. Okay, to make the arms, this is an example of a finished arm. It has both hex screws glued into the aluminum tubing. It's imperative that all of those are exactly the same length. So what we're going to do is make a jig using these corner braces. The first thing I've done is put a 8mm screw and nut on the corner brace. That slides in there. And on this side, we're going to use the block that I call it a pulley block because it goes at the bottom where the pulley is of the 3D printer. I'm going to tighten that down, and we're going to use another angle iron or angle brace, and this is basically going to be our jig for making all of the arms. So you should have ordered 2 extra magnets for this purpose alone. The magnet will just kind of pop right in there, and we want to loosen this guy up. Now, before this gets glued, what you want to do is glue one of these into each of the arms. Just go ahead and glue it in, and then you'll have that all ready. It won't move. Then on this side, what you want to do is get this to a point where it's closed and all the way together, but then pull it out just a little bit and go ahead and tighten your screw down. Alright, I've mixed up another batch of epoxy. I'm ready to make my arm here. So I'm just going to put the epoxy right on the threads of the screw there. Once again, don't get too much. I find it easiest to kind of thread the screw into it. Push it back and forth, get the glue in there nice and good. So now this is the almost tricky part. You want the angle bracket to be up nice and tight against that. In fact, I'm going to tighten it up as much as I can. Now, as the glue is drying, you can tell that it can move around ever so slightly. That's okay. It's not going to impact the performance of the arm, but if you just get it as straight as you possibly can by sight, that's going to be good enough. Let that set long enough for the glue to dry, and then you can take it apart. And you want to make sure the glue is nice and dry, because when you pull the magnet off, it does put quite a bit of force on the glue joint. That's it. Alright, it's time to start bolting the aluminum extrusion to the plastic. You don't need to cut this extrusion at all. If you order the 1/2 meter length from Inventables, it comes already the perfect size, so that makes it quite easy. Really what I'm doing here is putting a 10mm M5 screw in each of the holes and putting the extrusion nut on. Having it on a table is nice because you can simply slide it right in and it holds the screws and nuts up to the perfect height. Some of them need a little bit of adjustment. There we go. Alright, once that is in, you can simply make sure it's about the right length on each side and tighten the screws down. This will need to be done for each of the 6 sides. It's time to install the brace. Now there's a little bit of trick to this. In order to get it to go on smooth, you basically have to put in all of these little extrusion nuts beforehand on both sides. Let me go ahead and get those in here. And the trick is to get it lined up more or less where the screw is actually going to go, so that when you get it on there, the screw will be able to go in perfectly and you won't have to move around the nut very much. Once that's done on both sides, you can go ahead and start installing your screws. Once that tightens up, then the brace will be in place, and you need to do that for all 6 of the corners. I should also mention that before you put the other brace on the side, you do want to put in 2 extra extrusion nuts inside the aluminum extrusion, just in case you need to bolt something on later. Usually I don't use them. If you don't use them, you can always tighten a screw into it so they don't vibrate and make noise, but they're always nice to have in there just in case you do need them. I mount my display right here on top. You could mount a power supply or something off to the side, so having them installed at the very beginning of the assembly really helps out later. Alright, so the one thing you will want to do to the maker slide is tap the 4 holes, 2 on each side. You don't need to cut the maker slide. When you order it, it'll come pre-cut to 1 meter length, and that is perfect for the Trestle printer. When tapping, I don't recommend doing the tapping with a electric drill, especially if you're not very good at it. It really doesn't work out that well if you go at it with too much force. You could end up stripping the aluminum and really causing problems. Remember, you want to do like about 1 turn forward and a half turn back just to break the chip. Every once in a while I like to come all the way back out just to let some of the chips out of the workpiece. If you've got oil, that's a great thing to use during tapping. You want to go probably about at least ½ an inch into the material. Make sure there's threads all the way in there. These holes are actually very important for the measurement, making sure that the machine is built accurately. There's not a whole lot of places where I would stress that, but this happens to be one of those. So go ahead and tap each of the 4 holes in all 3 of the maker slides. Alright, I'm ready to slide the maker slide on. I wanted to point out that there's a right way and a wrong way. This would be the wrong way. I don't want the groove on this side. I actually want it on the other side. Make sure that all 3 are the same. When you slide these on, the problem is that these nuts spin a little bit. So if you could hold your finger at the bottom edge of it, then they slide on much easier. It takes a little bit of patience getting this on, and I know the bottom is the easiest way to go, assuming everything is lined up. There we go. Now the very bottom one is going to be the trickiest, so I'm going to use a yardstick and push it through the bottom hole there just to keep the bottom nuts from spinning as I slide the maker slide on. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up those screws, and this needs to be done for each of the 3 corners. Once again, this is the bottom section of the printer, and the top we're going to have to do all at the same time, so it's going to be a little bit trickier. Alright, before we proceed with putting the top on, we need to put the extrusion nuts in each of the towers. 2 need to go on the inside, and 3 need to go in each groove of the outside. The 2 on the inside, one goes for the pulley block, the other one goes for the limit switch. The outside ones will hold our extruder motors, reels of filament, or anything else that we want to bolt on. Alright, now we're ready to put on the top piece. I went ahead and installed all the screws and nuts on each of the corners, and I'm just going to slide it straight down onto the top. It's going to take a while, so please be patient. You want to do 2 screws at a time, here, 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 and then the whole thing can slide down to the next level where you can align the nuts, and then slide it down to the last level and align those. Once that's done, then you can kind of tighten them a little bit and make sure it doesn't come apart on you. There, all done. Okay, the next step is to loosen every single one of those screws in the entire frame. And this is kind of important. You want to make sure that they're a little bit loose, but not loose enough to let go of the nut. I'd say probably a quarter, a half turn is all that's necessary. The purpose is to make sure that this frame can move around as we calibrate it and make sure that it's straight and level. We want to be able to adjust it. So once all these screws are set, then we're going to install, as with all of the other plastic to extrusion screws, we use a 10 millimeter. So those should tighten right up. Now this is the most important connection of the entire frame, is these two screws that hold the end of the aluminum extrusion. Go ahead and tighten those decently tight. These need to stay tight, and the rest of the frame should move around a little bit as we adjust it. Now that we've tightened these two screws, those two, and those two, all of the other screws, leave them loose for a little bit. This paintbrush here is actually holding up a string that goes to a plumb bob down at the bottom of the machine. That plumb bob is actually going to show us exactly how straight the machine is. I put a little piece of white paper there so that the camera can see where the hole is. You can actually push the machine a little bit and get it to move the plumb bob directly over the hole. We can do that since all the screws are nice and loose right now. So now's the time to get this machine just set up just right. You don't need a square or any other type of measuring utility. The only thing that you really need to watch out for is that this is done on a completely level surface. If it's not level, it's really not going to work. Now, the only other thing that can go wrong is that if the machine twists like this, you can really watch for that by looking at the string and one of the towers and see if they line up. If they don't line up, then it's not twisted correctly. So you can basically, with all the screws loose, twist it so that the string lines up with the edge of the tower. And once the plumb bob is directly over the hole and there is no twisting to it, then you're ready to tighten the screws on all of the braces and get this machine nice and strong. You won't ever have to touch it again. Alright, before we go any farther, I gotta get this dog out of here.